Awesome. Thank you, Morgan.
Alrighty, well, thank you. Thank you to Attune for always helping set this up. We always get a great turnout, and we love working with Attune agents. There's something to be said about the ease of use of Attune and the ease of use of Neptune. It's really created an amazing partnership to allow brokers to be able to more easily get coverage for your clients, whether it's a BOP, whether it's flood, or any of the other products that Attune can offer. So really excited to be here again, coming up into the time when Neptune really has to shine, which is hurricane season. Started on June 1st. That's the official date. May 1st is the general date that I kind of go by. We start to see some activity picking up already at that point. But we're in hurricane season. There's already some activity in the Atlantic that we'll talk about here in a few moments. But hopefully we can give a little bit more of an understanding of how to go through Attune, to quote Neptune, whether it's for a commercial property and adding it onto a BOP, or any other type of risk that you come across, and how you can kind of get into the Neptune system and make that easier on you. Whether you're new, whether to the platform, whether you've been to one of these webinars before, hopefully there's something you can take away from this, pull together some interesting resources that I think will be helpful. So I want to do a quick introductions. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. One person not on this screen is Gabby. Gabby is helping answer any questions in the chat bot. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and she'll be able to go ahead and answer those as we move along. So don't hesitate at any point to do that. But I'll go ahead and let everybody else introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. My name is Shane Corcoran. I'm the carrier partnerships lead here at Attune. So what that means is that I oversee all of our digitally distributed products. So Neptune, Flood, our employers work comp, our Hiscox, GL, and PL, our Coalition Cyber, as well as our secondary Liberty Mutual BOP. Prior to that, I've been with Attune for roughly 5 years, getting close to 6 at this point. And before that, I was actually a personal lines broker.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan Dean. I am the content marketing manager here at Attune. I've been at Attune for almost 3 years. I started out as a customer care team member. So if you've been here for as long as me, you may have chatted with me on the phone or over text or email or chat or email. And then I transitioned over to the marketing team. I had done a lot of freelance graphic design work and stuff. So here I am. You might get emails from me from Attune. Hopefully they're not annoying you, but if they are, let me know. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this webinar. I always enjoy learning something new from Alex and the Neptune team.
Jean-Luc is not with us today. He's our Chief Customer Officer, heads over sales and services. But myself, I'm the Director of Commercial Lines Distribution. I've been with Neptune for 3.5 years, helping launch our commercial product back in June of 2020. Neptune obviously, well, may not obviously be, but we were originally a personal lines company. And then in June of 2020, we did launch the commercial product and our habitational commercial product, which is what I've helped grow and expand with multiple different partners, including Attune, to agents and brokers all over the country. So go ahead and take us to the next slide, which is kind of a step backwards. We did a webinar this time last year as well, talking a little bit about hurricane season. We also did a webinar specifically about Ian, but as about a year has passed at this point, I'd probably say it's around 8 months since Ian. Some stats and some statistics have come out that I thought were interesting to share and can give us some insight into next year and what we may see in this hurricane season. So Neptune had claims in 38 counties spanning 5 states. A lot of people definitely think of Hurricane Ian as a Florida hurricane, but when it went through Florida, it exited on the Atlantic side and continued up the East Coast. And we had claims in multiple states along the Eastern Seaboard. And as you can see, in a lot of different counties. At the time of Ian, we had about 5,000 policies in Southwest Florida and 30,000 policies in Florida as well in whole. Right now, I think we're around 42,000 policies in Florida. So while a lot of other companies have pulled back in the flood market and they're not writing new flood business in the state, they still are #1 state. We write the most business out of anywhere there. Our #1 counties are in Florida, and that's where Neptune is based out of. We're based in St. Petersburg, Florida. That's where I'm calling in from today. So we're doubling down on Florida. We did very well during Ian. We had less than 1,000 claims. even though we had over 150,000 policies at that time. So a very good loss ratio. And some other interesting facts about those claims: over 50% of the claims were submitted within 2 days of the event, and over 85% within 2 weeks. As you can also see, average 11 days from claim being made to inspection, and 12% of the claims were in non-SFHA zones. What I mean by that is they were not in mandatory flood zones. So you have your 3 general flood zones, V, A, and X. V and A are considered to be SFHA zones where it's required by a lender to have flood insurance. X is generally where it's not required. But as you can see, 12% of the claims, at least with Neptune, were in those non-mandatory flood zones. The general average nationwide with Neptune and with the NFIP is 25% of claims are usually in non-SFHA zones. So really important. I think that's a very important statistic to know, because I'm sure one of the most common reasons you get when you offer flood to a client that's not in one of these mandatory zones is they don't need to have it. They never think it's going to happen. I think that really speaks to both of those issues. 1 in 4 claims are going to be happening in those zones where they didn't think they were at risk, or the bank never told them they were at risk. So as an agent, being able to educate your clients on that, really be able to provide value, and hopefully for a lot of the people that were in those X zones that didn't have coverage, hopefully in the future they will. And that definitely helps with the repair, rebuild in a state and in a community. One other important statistic, as you can see at the bottom, the average claim payout on commercial policies was around 90% higher than on residential. If I'm going off the top of my head here from our personal line statistics, I believe that average claim is around $50,000. The average commercial claim is around $90,000. That kind of comes into line of what we're seeing here of being around 90% higher for the commercial properties. So that was looking in the past. Hopefully we have a bit of a quieter year this year. As you can see on this slide, they are predicting a near normal hurricane season. Every year they do these predictions based on the weather patterns to get an idea of what we may be looking at. 40% is saying near normal, looking at 12 to 17 named storms, 5 to 9 hurricanes, and 1 to 4 major hurricanes. Already, though, we are starting to see some activity. As I mentioned, official hurricane season starts June 1st. I like to think it starts more in May. That's when the oceans start heating up a little bit more, and when we generally get to see some activity building. Now, part of that activity and just how are they making these predictions, what makes one year different from the other, a lot of that actually comes down to weather patterns. One of the 2 most popular or common that people hear about, and you may have heard about yourself, are El Niño and La Niña. For the past couple of years, we've been in a La Niña phase, which generally just means the polar jet stream has been pushing warm water that may be off the coast of South America, pushing it over to Asia and allowing cold water to rise off the coast of South America. Now, what does that really mean? Well, it means that it pushes the polar jet stream, as you can see here, upwards and leads to wetter winters in the Pacific Northwest, in the Ohio River Valley, and leads to drier winters in the South, and also a lot of drought. And what that also does is this, you can kind of look at this polar jet stream. This is an air current, and it's also a protective barrier against hurricanes. It's that wind shear that can really break up some hurricanes. It makes it a little bit more difficult for them to move as freely. When it's pushed up, it really allows hurricanes to come into the Atlantic and into the Gulf of Mexico a little bit easier. And we generally see higher than average hurricane seasons during La Niña years. This year actually is the first El Nino in a while, generally the opposite of La Niña, so a lot more warm water off the coast of South America. What that does is bring that jet stream lower, as you can see here, and lead to wetter winters along the south. That's also part of the reason we're seeing a lot of flooding out in California with some of those atmospheric rivers. But then it also leads to drier, warmer periods up in the north. Now, I was up in New York City not too long ago when the wildfires were happening. I'm sure our New York City friends over at Attune experienced some of that as well. I'm not a meteorologist, so I can't claim there's a true correlation here, but drier winters do lead to some more wildfires in the northern parts. So not 100% sure if that's the case, but I mean, I'm looking at dry and I'm looking at a polar jet stream pointing to New York in the tri-state area. So that's part of the things you can kind of think about when thinking about weather patterns and how it affects some of the cat events that you see. Now, One thing about El Nino, while it does provide a nice shear and prevents hurricanes from easily moving into the Caribbean and the Atlantic, makes it a little bit more difficult for them to move in, it does mean warmer water. So what we're kind of seeing right now is average daily ocean surface temperatures are higher than average. As you can see, the line here is our 1982 to 2011 average, in between the 20 degrees Celsius and 20.5 degrees Celsius. Over the past couple of years, it has been a bit higher with 2016 and 2022. But this year in particular is hitting some new records, as you can see, over 21 degrees Celsius in 2023. So that warmer temperatures does lead to stronger hurricanes. Now, is that going to offset the shear from El Nino? That kind of makes it difficult for hurricanes to move in. That really, we have to wait and see how that all comes into effect and what that looks like. But already we are seeing a few storms building out off the coast of Africa and moving towards North America and South America. So here you can actually see, I pulled this morning, tropical storm Brett has already formed. It has been named, and there is a storm trailing right behind it in its coattails that will be following its path. Basically what they are seeing, it is going to move into the Caribbean by Sunday morning. At that point, if it continues heading into the Caribbean, there is some very heavy wind shear that will make it very difficult to maintain its shape and continue to gain energy as it heads into the Gulf Coast. But a lot of models also show it pulling off northwest as well. One thing I think that's important, you're going to see this all throughout hurricane season, and if you live in the area, you see these cones of uncertainty or cones of certainty of where they think hurricanes are going to track. It's really important to understand that just because the middle of that cone is pointing to a certain area doesn't mean that it's a certainty that it's going to be headed that way. These models, they change. It's hard to predict out in the future in any type of field. And we're pretty decent at it with weather, but it's still quite difficult to get that accurate. And that's actually one thing going back that we saw during Hurricane Ian. All the models were showing it headed towards the Tampa Bay area, which is where I live. Definitely very concerned. I have flood insurance. I live in a non-mandatory flood zone, X zone. Being in the industry, obviously, I'm a little bit more biased to getting flood insurance, but I have it on my own home. And I was still very concerned. We get sandbags, getting all prepped. And we actually ended up evacuating down south, which I probably should have had north. But at the last moment, the storm did take a turn south and hit more of the Fort Myers, Cape Coral area. And that really is that cone of uncertainty, or the certainty cone, where it can go anywhere. That cone was so large, it could have gone down to Naples all the way up above Tampa. So really just understanding that for your clients as well. Just because the middle of the cone is pointed at an area, everybody within that cone should be concerned and being vigilant. Make sure you're prepared. Make sure you have emergency supplies and the plan in place. Just really want to throw that out there for hurricane season, as going through that last year was it was a difficult time for everybody on the west coast of Florida, especially our neighbors to the south. So understanding that, I think, is helpful not only for you and your own families if you're along that area in the Gulf Coast, Atlantic seaboard, but also for your clients as well. So we'll see how this all plays out over the next couple of weeks. Don't quote me, but I do believe that it will break up a little bit as it moves closer or head out into the Atlantic, and not really cause too many issues for people compared to other hurricanes and storms. Speaking of flooding, though, it's not just hurricanes. And I think that's really important. A lot of people think about flooding and they think about Hurricane Ian, Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina. But flooding happens all over the country, whether there's really three main types of flooding that occur. You have coastal or surge risk. This is when those oceans rise and they carry that water with them, and can cause complete total losses, as we saw down in the Fort Myers area, where storm surge was over 10 feet in certain regions, completely swallowing buildings and knocking them off their foundations. I was just at FAIA, which is the annual Florida conference of insurance agents. And someone in the Naples area was showing me a picture of a bunch of sedans and cars that got washed out to sea, and also boats that were now in the middle of the road. So surge risk is definitely a high potential for catastrophic loss, high potential for loss of life. Definitely one type of flooding people think about, but there's other types as well. So even if you're not along the coast, maybe you're more in the interior, flood is still a risk and a peril that's important to talking about with your clients. I talked to some agents in the middle of the country in Illinois, and along the Mississippi, and they are thinking more about river overflow. And that's the second main type of flooding I like to talk about. This entire past, I'd say 6 to 8 months in the news, if anyone in that region may know, is a lot of people are talking about the Mississippi overflowing its banks. A lot of heavy rainfall was causing the Mississippi to rise. We have a bunch of levees along the Mississippi that try to help prevent that, but it really comes down to duration and intensity. If it rains long enough or it rains hard enough, ultimately flooding can occur. River overflow, it happened in St. Louis last year, major flooding in that area, happened in Memphis, Tennessee, and a few other areas around the country, especially all along that Mississippi. But there's so many rivers in the United States, pretty much any area you go to, maybe besides out in the desert, there's going to be a risk of river overflow, and something to really talk about with your clients with that regard, depending on where they're located. We even saw that during Hurricane Ian. So it's not just one type of flood risk that sometimes you have to worry about. When Hurricane Ian hit Florida, it dumped a lot of water on Orlando, which is in the middle of the state. But Florida's one big watershed. I was actually just down in the Everglades on vacation with my father-in-law, my wife, and they were they're not from Florida. They wanted to see the Everglades, but the Everglades is one very slow moving river. It looks like it's a stagnant base of water, but all the rivers flow into it from up north in Florida. And then the Everglades itself is actually a slow moving river as well. So when that water got dumped in Orlando, it actually ended up moving down the state and causing massive flooding in my hometown of Sarasota and Northport, flooding the highway. A lot of people were stranded, not even by the water. They were 30, 40 miles inland experiencing that flooding because of that river overflow in a kind of a different way of thinking about it versus, say, the Mississippi overflowing. So even if you're not in those by the coast and thinking about surge risk, heavy rain can absolutely cause flooding. And I know up in New York during Hurricane Ida, that was another reason for some issues in New York with sewage lines and the drainage systems not being able to handle that. So even in concrete areas, when you get heavy rainfall, you can experience overflow, maybe not from a river, but from a sewage area or a drainage system. The last type of flooding is pluvial, and that has to do with flash or surface flooding. It really depends on the geography where you see this. Not as much in Florida, but we did see that kind of with the Orlando example. But especially in mountainous areas, you can see that gravity take hold of that water. It can cause quick and devastating impacts. Definitely high risk for loss of life and property damage from flash flooding. Urbanization plays a role in this. If you don't have groundwater to soak that up, water is going to sit on top of that concrete or that asphalt, and it'll flow wherever the elevation takes us, and it'll keep flowing until it hits something. But drought also is another major player. So say you're out in California and hasn't had rain in really good rain in 5 years, or that soil may not be prepared to take on that much water, or even after a wildfire. When you have a wildfire, that soil can't retain as much water. 1 inch of water can all of a sudden cause a mudslide or a flash flood. So definitely something to keep in mind. Even if you're not in the hurricane season conversation out west, that is a concern as well. Now I have these YouTube videos here. I'm going to quickly go ahead and share these. I think visual examples are extremely helpful. And if you can even provide these to your own clients, I would recommend that as well. Providing visual examples of what this can look like. It's really difficult to talk about flood because ultimately it is a low frequency, high intensity event. It may not happen for 20 years of them owning their business, but at one time it happens can completely wipe them out. Maybe it's on year 1 of the opening their business, or maybe it's on year 20, but really talking about that risk, making sure they're aware of what that looks like. And that really comes back to also from the broker side, making sure that you understand your specific area, because each area is different. You don't want to be talking about hurricanes if you're in the middle of Nebraska. So understanding your area, the risks that you need to be talking about with your clients. So I'll go ahead and play this real quick. Just take a quick time lapse of Hurricane Ian and the coastal surge that occurred. Here we can see the water slowly moving in, and it quickly picks up the entire area being flooded. You'll start to see cars start to move at that level. And at this point, It's not even cars getting lifted off their feet. It's completely inundated. And all the lower level properties, you can see this building's elevated. Elevating buildings are generally going to do better when it comes to price for flood insurance, partially because lower risk. But at this point, the surge is so high that even an elevated building was unable to sustain it at that point. So really just the power of coastal surge. You can see here, terrible event. It's pretty shocking to look at. The entire ocean is in the Fort Myers area here. And this happened in multiple different areas along the coast of Florida. And still people are rebuilding, and our thoughts and prayers go out to them. So that's the coastal surge risk. So another example here just of river flooding.
Big waters, the flooding that's happening in
A lot of different examples you can look at. This is actually the Orlando example I was talking about. This is not by the water. This is by the interstate. And you can see the water slowly moving through the watershed, moving down north to south in Florida.
Northport to the point where it's backing up I-75, and there are water rescues that we just showed you. This is live helicopter video of those waters rising in the Myakka River in Northport. This is not the only river right now, Shari, I might add, that is cresting and getting even higher right now because of the impacts that Ian is now leaving behind in its wake. And we're talking about that water coming through from Central Florida now pouring into our riverways.
Can we bring in meteorologist Andrew Shipley, and we
Right,
can talk
it's
over
incredible.
this? That's totally fine, guys in the back. But Andrew, this is incredible video to see. It's heartbreaking to see. Can you explain to people what exactly is happening here? And is it going to be a while before we actually see these waters kind of some type of relief here?
Well, they're going to start to press tomorrow, but I do have an email I do agree to you. Our own Ian Scott,
No, he's getting his mic. There he is.
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
Sorry about that. I do want to get to this email that our own Keenan Scott just got from Northport, and I'll read it to you. At this time, we don't know how sure the water will get, but the situation is, we're continuing to monitor the situation. Residents who feel unsafe and need to immediately evacuate from flooded areas are encouraged to call 911. Crews have been working around the clock to reach residents in flooded areas and evacuate them.
So that's just I could go longer there, but you already got the general idea from what I was talking about. This is not even coastal areas, and you can see that river flooding occurring in the inland of the state as that moved down from north to south into the Everglades, into Lake Okeechobee, et cetera. But that's not just Florida. We're talking about any river system. You're going to be seeing these cresting of rivers. We saw it all along the Mississippi this year. And then out in Yellowstone, we see flash flooding occurring in river systems. So definitely something to keep in mind if there's even a creek around your area. So a lot of these areas that you're seeing this overflow were small little creeks in Florida. But when there's such a heavy amount of water, we're talking duration and intensity. It rained for so long and for so hard that these little creeks turned into raging rivers. Sometimes I see a lot of when we quote buildings, an agent will ask me why is the rate what it is? And I can actually look behind the scenes, and we have our mapping system and our models. And I'll point out a creek behind the property. And they say, well, that's just a tiny little creek. It's barely even has much water in it. But ultimately what they're not seeing is that creek being connected to maybe another tributary, which is connected to a major river. And when you get all that heavy rainflow, that little creek can turn into a raging river and cause massive damage. So sometimes, even if it's a creek bed, you hear about this in drier areas out west. An empty creek bed can all of a sudden turn into a raging river because of flash flooding. And that same principle applies even in a wet area like Florida when you get enough rain. Speaking of flash flooding, one more video
storms overnight
to show you here.
Parts of Pennsylvania pounded by torrential downpours and flash flooding, forcing emergency rescues, and parts of Texas soaked by more than a foot of rain. ABC's Marcus Moore is in Weslaco, Texas with the latest. Good morning, Marcus.
Michael, good morning. I'm standing on a 3-lane roadway that is submerged in water. You see the cars flooded out just behind me off in the distance there. This community, this region, taking a real pounding overnight. Overnight, extreme flash flooding sweeping through towns from Texas to Pennsylvania.
Oh my God.
Entire neighborhoods in Weslaco, Texas, underwater. Roads washed away and fish washing in, going for a swim in the streets. Watch as this Texas state trooper pulls a struggling woman out of the menacing tide in Mercedes. Not far away, these two men, neck deep, wading through the rushing water. These aerials showing the storm's strength. more than 15 inches of rain in areas already hit hard by Hurricane Harvey last August. And just
So whether it's Pennsylvania, whether it's Texas, anywhere, it's really important to know wherever it rains. This is a super common saying in flood insurance. It may even be a little bit old if you've heard it before, but wherever it rains, it can flood. If 15 inches of rain hits any area, they're going to have some difficulty maintaining that. So it's not, okay, maybe there's not a river by the property. Maybe there's not proximity to the coast, but heavy rainfall. It can be sporadic. Maybe they don't get 15 inches of rain for another 10 years. But that one event can cause major impacts to a business. And ultimately, flooding is one of the natural disasters that when it does impact a business, there's a very high probability that they're not going to reopen, either because they didn't have flood insurance. That's the most general reason is when they do not have flood insurance, because FEMA and the NFIP, or FEMA in general, the grants that they provide could be $5,000 to $10,000. But if you're looking at $90,000 to $100,000 in damages, a $5,000 to $10,000 loan that you actually have to repay generally is not going to be enough. And then just talking about the time it takes to get up and running can hurt a brand, hurt your ability to maintain your business moving forward. So just want to go ahead and provide those examples. I think they're quite helpful in getting an understanding of what each of those looks like and what type of risks that you need to be talking about with your clients, because everybody is a little bit unique. Everybody has a different property, and you don't want to be talking about coastal surge if that's not exactly what they're going to be looking at. So just want to bring us to this page, talking really now into, okay, let's get into the nitty gritty about how to actually go ahead and quote with Neptune and Attune. Before I go ahead and pass it off to Shane, I want to actually give you a quick breakdown of what that looks like in our system. So I'll go ahead and share my screen one more time before passing it off to Shane. But I want to go ahead and share a map of the United States. And this is actually a live view into our quoting system, giving you a view into where agents are quoting with us today. We process around 15,000 quotes daily. We're doing over 1,000 policies a week on the personal lines through commercial side. But this is actually a live view into that. Every flash is an agent running a quote. And there's actually some other things that we can pull from this information. So number one, the first thing that we do when you enter an address on the Attune system and you get a rate that populates is we're going to be saying yes or no. Every green flash you see is where we're saying yes. Every red flash you see is where we say no. Right now, we have about a 98% acceptance rate nationwide. So while a lot of companies, they may only be writing in certain zones or certain states, we're very broad and generalist, writing pretty much everywhere the NFIP is going to be writing. There are a few areas we don't write. For our New Yorkers, we're not writing in Fire Island. For our Floridians, we're not writing in Key West. For our Texans, we're not writing in San Padre Island. But on Galveston, Naples, Fort Myers, all along Long Island, Manhattan, Brooklyn, we are writing in those areas all across the country. So every green flash is where we say yes. Every red flash is where we say no. Why are we saying no? Because we are a private flood company. Our goal is to be around for a very long time. We've been through 5 hurricane seasons successfully, and we want to be around for many, many more. So by saying no to those 2% of properties, we're able to offer better rates on the 98% we say yes to. If we said yes 100% of the time, we'd also be $40 billion in debt, like the NFIP. And as a private company, we can't afford to do that. You hear everything going on in the reinsurance market. Luckily, we have very good relationships with our capacity providers. We just renewed all of our capacity, doubling in some cases our capacity because of the results we've been able to sustain by being sound in our underwriting principles, which may sometimes be frustrating when we say no to a property, but ultimately is beneficial for all of us in the long run to be able to continue to partner with Attune and provide flood insurance coverage for your clients. The second thing that we do is calculate the premium. If we look here, every size circle on the screen is indicative of the size of the premium. So right away, when you enter an address and you're getting a rate back at Attune, we're saying yes, and we're generating that premium. So we're underwriting that risk in seconds so that you're able to get that information and offer it to your clients. So you're not waiting around for that. And you can go and move on with whatever else you're quoting, whether it's the GL or anything else that Attune is offering for you. The last thing we do actually has to do with capacity. So Neptune actually has 5 different capacity providers. We have paper through Lloyd's. We have 3 different syndicates of Lloyd's. We have Indian Harbor, who's backed by AXA XL, and then we have Transverse as well. All of it's A- or better. And our system in real time is actually making sure we're spreading out that risk among our different buckets, depending on their appetites. The rates are identical, the policy format is identical. We're just doing that to make sure that we're spreading out our risk accordingly, so that if another Ian does hit Tampa Bay, no one carrier is over leveraged. And ultimately that means in capacity renewals and everything you're hearing about in the news with the hard market, we're in a better position to keep those rates lower, those increases lower for you and your clients. So that is a quick breakdown of Neptune, and we went through a few different topics here. I'm gonna pass it back to Shane, so we can kind of get a look at the Attune side. And if you have any questions, I haven't seen many come through on the Q&A. Like I said, you can ask at any point. Happy to dive into that, but I'll go ahead and pass it back to Shane.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, now that we're all experts on flood, what we really want to focus on is showing how easy it is to get a quote through the Attune and Neptune integration. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And I like to say, did everything come through? Can I see a thumbs up quick?
Yep.
The way we're set up, and as Alex kind of hinted at, is you can be creating an account for, say, a BOP quote or a GL quote or something, maybe not flood, but we'll just with the location address, we'll be able to ping the Neptune API and present you with an indication. And that indication will change based on the coverages that you select, limits that you might change, things like that. But we'll be able to give you that indication just by creating the account. So before I get into that, one thing I like to do is kind of step back quickly and show our support tab. And this is where you'll be able to find our flood underwriting guidelines. So this has some FAQ questions, general guidelines that if maybe you're not familiar with flood, you can use this as a resource and reference it as you go through and start getting some quotes done. But let's get into the nitty gritty of it. Before I create a new account, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show one of my test ones before. So in this example, say I quoted a BOP instead. If you scroll down to the bottom, we will just by creating the account with the address, we will be able to ping Neptune API and give you that indication. And then from there, you can visit the Neptune portal and go through with that quote, but you'll have that premium idea in your premium idea to start rather than starting from scratch. So I'll do is I will go in and create a new client. I will say Shane, Florida Flood 4 here. 20. Petersburg. One thing that's great with our portal is that we'll try and best guess the address that you're trying to do to again make it as easy as possible for you to begin the quote and move through to the next section. So I'll click this Florida address here. One thing to note, and I know for many businesses they do have the same mailing and location address. But something to keep in your back of your mind is if the mailing address is, say, a PO box or something like that, if you're here for a flood, I would really recommend creating the account based on the location rather than mailing address, and you can amend the mailing address afterwards. Otherwise, you might run into some issues when quoting and have to create a second flood again because it will keep the location of the mailing address. And that's caused some friction in the past. Since we were quoting a flood, I'll say this is a restaurant, but the classification of business doesn't really matter when it comes to flood. We'll scroll down, and for the sake of this, I will click get a quote in the flood insurance here. I hope my computer does not fail me in my time of need. Perfect. So what this will do is it'll give you a few tips and tricks, some very useful facts that you might have before really getting into the Neptune portal. So for example, available in every state but Alaska and Kentucky, your commission rates, quote and bind in minutes with no elevation certificate required. And I won't read the rest of them as this will pop up. But if I click continue to Neptune, this will direct us right into the Neptune portal and allow you to continue with your commercial flood quote. One thing to note is that the Attune portal right now is set up only for their commercial product, but with our relationship with Neptune, we're able to offer all of the quotes, all of the products that they have in their platform. So for example, if I were to go back and let's just go to Shane Flood 2 here. and I click on Visit Neptune, if I click See All Quotes and Policies, this will bring me to the main Neptune page, and this will allow me to access their residential products as well. So once this loads, I'll show you how that's done. It's the same very simple process. Again, 5 minutes tops, but it is a bit of a workaround. I don't want you to think that you do not have access to the residential quotes as well. Here we go. So for in this case, this brings me to the main Neptune portal. All we need to do is put in 132 Central Ave, St. Petersburg. Here we go. Verify the address, click OK. And then this will bring me to where all of the products are offered. So say in this example, it was residential 1-family home or an apartment or something like that. This is where you'd be able to select that. One final thing I'd like to note is if you were going through and quoted a commercial, rather than going back to another account, another workaround that you can do is just by clicking up here in the top left, the Neptune agency portal, and this brings you back to the Neptune homepage as well. So say you quoted a BOP, PL, you also quoted the commercial flood for a business, and you also want to quote maybe that business owner's home. Rather than going back in to create a new account, which you're more than welcome to do to access more easily, you can begin the quote all in one simple flow. But with that, before I pass it back to Alex and let him go through the actual Neptune portal flow, I will pause for any questions. I do think one came through.
Yep, I'll address that one as well, and here in a second.
Perfect.
I think we're good. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Okay.
And I know that was fast, folks. So if at the end of this, you'd like to see the demo again, I'm more than happy to go through.
So here at this point, I'll go ahead and address the question in the chat box. Gabby, just so you know, you messaged to the host and panelists. So for any future questions, you can actually change that to send to everyone. But the question was, do you offer flood insurance for a builder's risk policy? So really important distinction. We write very similarly to the NFIP. The policy form is identical. So anything you write with the NFIP, you can write with Neptune. Now, all that really goes to say, we write buildings under construction, but we're not necessarily writing builder's risk. So if it's for a contractor who's working on a building, the policy that we're writing has to be in the name of the insured or has the insurable interest on the property. So if someone's building their own home or working on their own business, then we can write a policy for that building in the name of the building owner. So buildings under construction are eligible, but I try to be very careful with the word builder's risk because that leads to a different type of product per se. So just want to put that out there. But the true test is if the NFIP is writing it, Neptune will write it. The only other things that you need to keep in mind, the quoting process is identical through Attune for that type of building, but the coverage actually can be a little bit different. So actually, this is a perfect opportunity to showcase our AI chatbot. If you have any questions 24/7, you can actually ask them here. And you can ask buildings under construction and we'll see what they say. Ultimately, I'll give you the quick download because our chatbot is quite chatty. Ultimately, the deductible is doubled while under construction. And also it has to be positively elevated or else it has to be walled and roofed. If it's walled and roofed, you're all set. But sometimes you're building from the ground up. And there would be no coverage until walled and roofed if it's a negatively elevated building. So you can see some of that here. It listed out talking about this, in this case, about a home. That's a little bit of a longer answer. So apology for going down a bit of a tangent on that, but it is a very important question. We get asked that all the time. So hopefully that helped Peter to explain a little bit. Buildings under construction, we do write. I just don't want to go in too loosely with the builder's risk term. So starting from the top on the page, you came over from Attune. Here you have your quote number. Your quotes are valid for 60 days in the system. After 60 days, they do expire. So something to keep in mind. We're always doing big changes, working on new products. working on new features. I actually have some exciting updates to share today. I'm not sure if I've fully shared these with the Attune team. I think I have, but if not, this is a surprise for you as well. So all good news, everybody, but I'll talk about those in a second. Down here, we have our inception date. You'll see it's automatically set to 6/30. We do have a 10-day waiting period, unlike the 30-day waiting period with the NFIP. And you can also waive our 10-day wait for two different reasons, either for a real estate transaction like a closing or for a renewal. So if you have a policy that renews with the NFIP this Friday, you can go ahead, waive our 10-day wait, get your policy into effect, and prevent any lapse in coverage. Same applies if it's closing. In both cases, you just want to upload a prior deck page or a closing statement post-bind. Here's some general information about the structure. We can see where it's located. We have an interactive Google Map tool. Zillow doesn't really work much for on the commercial side, but you can see that tool there. The prior flood loss question, Neptune does allow one loss less than 25,000. If it's a loss for 25,000 or more than one loss, we would reject. Basically looking at severity and frequency, all we ask is that you as the agent ask the insured this question and they answer to the best of their ability. We're not going to require loss history reports. It's really to their knowledge. So if they're buying this sports bar and they don't know that answer, they go ahead and put no. Now, if they're the owner of the sports bar, they got a $50,000 check in the mail from Hurricane Ian. That's what we're really trying to make sure we're preventing. But just want to keep that in mind when quoting no loss history reports. Just ask your insured that question. We do pre-fill the year built square footage and flood zone. For any reason that's wrong, we do give you the ability to edit that, giving you that functionality, but very highly accurate. We're pulling in that information for you to make this process easier. Neptune does not require an elevation certificate. You're more than welcome to use one if you have one available. When we first launched our commercial product in June of 2020, about 20% of our policies had elevation certificates. Now it's at 8%. So we're getting more and more accurate with our underwriting and our elevations that we're pulling internally. But if you want to use one, you're more than welcome to. You can go ahead, press that button and add it in here. If it helps the rate, that's great. You can leave it in there. If it hurts the rate, maybe it goes from 2,500 to 5,000, you can actually take it out and we'll honor that rate 100%. So there is no downside to using an elevation certificate. Construction type, we can go ahead and answer this. We can see wood frame, the occupancy. This is a restaurant, so maybe it's a tenant. You can actually do contents only as well with Neptune. If you go ahead and select I rent, you can go down, bring building coverage to 0 and do a contents only policy. Very popular, especially when we're talking about those X-zone properties. Maybe they just need $100,000 of coverage. They don't even need to satisfy our lender. They just want to have some coverage in case something does happen. You can go ahead and do these smaller policies, $840, add that onto the BOP. Just a great option to be able to offer your clients. It doesn't have to be that huge flood policy all the time. Now, if a lender is requiring it at $500,000, then that's a different story. But in many cases, especially with Attune, I think close to 30% of our book is actually non-mandatory flood, because Attune makes it so easy with our API to bring in a flood quote that agents are just able to add that on and grow the number of policies per relationship. So highly recommend playing around with these features. And just know that you always don't have to offer that 500,000 amount, especially if it's not required, or maybe the insured's that price sensitive that they're not willing to pay 2,500, but 840 is something they're more interested in. So I'll go ahead and bring it back to IOWN. One thing we just added for everybody here is foundation types. For the longest time, we have not had foundation types on commercial. The reason being is the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act basically mandated that most buildings be built on slab for accessibility purposes. Now, older buildings, you may see older commercial buildings be built on crawl spaces, or very rarely you may see them actually elevated on stilts and pilings. But we do have these options here. It's definitely very beneficial on our condo product. There's a lot of condos right by the water. The 2 to 4 family condo buildings that are on stilts down in South Carolina, North Carolina, that's going to benefit from this. But even older commercial buildings, I know a few in the Charleston area that are built on crawl spaces. They're older buildings, and this can be beneficial for that elevation credit. We go ahead and put a number of stories, and now we get down to coverages. Our minimum building coverage amount is 50,000. That's the lowest that we will go. If you just need to satisfy a bank requirement, we can do $500,000 on the building, and that's fine. But we also go well above that, all the way up to $4 million in building coverage. So if you really want to properly insure your client and give them that full building limit with rising construction costs and just rising building values in general, we really give you that feasibility. So you don't have to go out and get an excess policy. You can go put it all on one primary. Deductible up to 50,000. And then down here, we have our optional coverage. You can see we have a BI coverage. It's $25,000. This is a flood BI, provides $500 a day for up to 50 days after a 14-day wait. As you can see right now, it's a yes or no question. Another big update in about the next month or two, we're going to be adding, increasing our BI limit from 25,000 to 50,000. So doubling that limit for our brokers to be able to better protect from that risk. It's a very popular coverage with about 10% of our policyholders having this. Now, the biggest change that's going to be coming in the next 2 to 3 months is replacement cost for commercial. This has been a huge ask from our agents and our brokers to have that option added on. Part of the reason is sometimes it's not about competing on price. You want to be able to add something that the NFIP can't offer. BI is great, but maybe that's not the selling point that you're looking to have. Replacement cost will be added very shortly. It's going to be a game changer for the product. So not only can you do better coverage in terms of limits and optional coverages like BI, but also be able to do replacement cost settlement for your clients. But at this point, it's that easy. We go ahead, enter in the named insured. We have our final premium. We can go ahead, enter in the insured's information, email, phone number. This is my phone number here. If you ever have any issues, feel free to reach out to me, and this is my email as well. This is going to be the insured's information, though. We are direct bill. So when you bind, we're going to send out information to the client via the email you put down. It'll include a link to sign and pay. And at this point, we can view our quote. We can actually send a rejection email. So from an E&O perspective, maybe they decline that X zone property. You can actually send a rejection email. It saves in our system, protects you from any E&O risks. But if you want to go ahead and bind it, you can go ahead and do that as well. Press bind. It'll pop up an application for you as the agent to sign. And it'll also include a payment opportunity as well. But like I said, we are direct bill. We'll send an email out to the client and they can sign and pay online. Now it's my turn for my computer to go a little bit slow. Let me refresh my page real quick, see if it bound. Read only, it did bind. I'll go into the policy. And this is where it would have brought us. It would have brought us right here to the document signing page where we as the agent can go ahead and sign our application. Once we sign, it'll allow us to pay by ACH, credit card, or by check. You can skip over it. Payment's not due at the time of bind. It's due by the effective date. Email, the insured will get that email. They can sign and pay. And you have immediate access to your policy jacket, deck page, application, invoice, all that information. And that's how easy it is. Coding, binding, policy generation. We'd really try to make it very simple. And just really improve that process. The whole goal of all of this is to allow you to sell more flood. Flood has always been a very difficult product for a lot of agents. You no longer have to have a flood specialist or a flood team. If you do, that's great. I work with a lot of flood teams, but anybody can now really utilize and quote flood. When you're quoting that BOP, you can add it on very simply from the Attune portal. So big thank you again to our partners at Attune for raising more awareness and really helping add that as a feature in their system because it really is important that business owners are protected from that risk. Now I'm going to quickly go ahead and bring us back to the final slide that I have before I pass it back to Attune for any last remarks. And that's just really best practices of how to sell. A lot of agents will say, okay, this is great. It's an easy flood tool, but how do I sell flood? We talked a little bit about the very common rejection people get of it won't ever happen to me. Starting from the top, though, I think it's very important to know your geography and history. We talked about knowing the different types of flood risk that your insureds will be facing, but also knowing your history, knowing that area very well. I always tell insurance agents that sometimes you need to be your own historian of your area. I was just out in Houston talking with agents, and one of the things that they talked about is insureds are starting to forget about Harvey, which is a crazy statement. I don't even know how accurate that is, but they're saying that they're seeing that where people are saying, well, a storm hasn't happened since Harvey. We haven't had many flood losses. We're going to get rid of our flood coverage. So people have very short memories, and it's really up to agents and brokers to be that historian, to know their area and their geography, to be that educator for their clients. that all comes down to the next piece of forget mandatory versus non-mandatory. X zone, A zone, V zone, those are really just in place for banks. Banks want to know when they have to require flood to protect their investment. The business owner who put all that money into their business, took out loans, that is their investment, whether it's in an X zone, an A zone, or a V zone. If they lose that, that is highly detrimental. So forget about the mandatory versus non-mandatory. Really make sure you know what the risk is for your clients. Offer it as a full package of protection with that BOP, because the BOP's not going to be covering that in those events where they have those flood risks. So definitely a important topic to bring up with clients. As we talked about, 25% of all flood claims happen in those non-mandatory zones. So it's not like it's not happening. 1 in 4 times out of every flood loss, it is in those non-mandatory zones. Another common, we talked about the #1 natural disaster in the United States, but people still say it won't ever happen to me. People up in Yellowstone have experienced flooding. I think that one of the most interesting statistics I've heard is that in the past 365 days, every single every single state in the United States has experienced some form of flood event. So it is not unique to Florida or Louisiana or Texas or New York or New Jersey or California. It is all over the United States. There may be lower risk in certain areas, but that's really up for you to be able to educate your clients on. And the last 2 things are playing the tape forward and creating a flow. So when you're talking with your clients, really make sure they understand the end result of what a Hurricane Ian looks like, or what a Hurricane Ida or Hurricane Sandy looks like. Do they have 90,000 for that average commercial flood claim to self-insure their property? Many of the claims, the ones you saw in North Fort Myers Beach, are much higher than that. But do they have that money if an event does occur? And then ultimately, from an agency perspective, because it's so easy, you're in Attune already, you're quoting your BOPs, make sure you're quoting flood. It takes about 2 minutes. You can offer it to your client, and if they don't want it, you can protect your E&O by having them sign a disclosure. Very common with cyber as well, something you're adding on to a BOP or another product. Protecting E&O, it's a topic that it's not talked about enough, but I really want to bring some attention to that as well. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate Attune for putting this together. We love working with Attune and all the brokers and agents, and excited for another great couple months. Hopefully we can continue to grow. And thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And thank you all for joining the webinar. I think we are almost right on the dot when it comes to time, but we can pause for a couple minutes if there are any last minute questions. I saw one come through. Thank you, Gabby, for answering that. Just for the folks that maybe you're not monitoring the chat, Kira asked if there's an option to choose the coverage limit for Neptune, or does it pull the full limit and require that value for the building? And the answer is that you are able to choose the limit. You do not have to choose the one that is pulled. You can either type it in, or you can use the sliding bar that's present.
And another thing that's important is Neptune does not require appraisals or replacement cost estimates like the NFIP does. I know a lot of times at renewal, you get one rate, you pay it, then they come back, ask for an appraisal. The rate changes, you got to go pay it again. So definitely something to keep in mind. Neptune does not require that. We're pulling that information on our own end. And you can do anywhere between 50 to 4 million. We are right on the time. I guess that's a good thing for myself. I time myself well, but if there are any other follow-up questions, reach out to the Attune team, reach out to myself. We're all happy to help with whatever comes up.
We're becoming pros at this, Alex. We've got it down to the exact 60 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. Like I mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar, the slide deck, and any other resources that we've shared, we will get that to you either later today or tomorrow. And it looks like we have one question that just popped up from Nina.
Yes. So does Neptune hold on the business in Houston area like Harris and Fort Bend County? Houston is our #1 metro in the entire United States. This has the highest demand out of anywhere, which, like I said, it's kind of surprising people are forgetting about it, considering how much business we're still seeing in that area. I think agents are very well aware of the risk in Houston. So it's our #1 metro on a daily basis, even now. But we are pulling back a little bit for important purposes. If we, the demand is so high in Houston that if we wrote every single policy that people ask for, all of our capacity would be in Houston because there's so many people, there's so many buildings, so many homes. So we're still writing in Houston. We are putting a brake on the pedal a little bit, but that does not mean we're shutting off business at all. It's still our #1 metro, even with that pedal, that brake being pushed a bit. So we are trying to slow down some of that demand just so that we don't have 90% of our book in Houston. And that's not the case. It's a much smaller percentage, but still based on any other metro, it is higher. You mentioned you quoted several houses and are getting an error for underwriting. You will see some more of that. That's part of that break that I was talking about. But just yesterday, I believe I wrote 20 to 30 policies in the Houston area. So I definitely recommend continue to quote. It may be frustrating, but that's part of what we have to do so that we're around for a long time. So many other companies are pulling out of Houston that we're one of the few capacity sources left, and we can't dedicate all capacity to Houston. We want to get it to Dallas, Florida, California. So you will see some of that in that area. There's only 3 areas in the country you generally see some of that brake pedal. It's going to be the Pinellas, Tampa Bay area. You're going to see that in the Atlantic City, New Jersey area, and then also in the Houston, Texas area. But they're still our top counties. We're still writing the most policies there daily. But that's something we have to do because that's where the majority of people are buying flood. And if we just opened it up 100%, there'll be an over aggregation. So we do that to slow it down. A long answer, but hopefully that was helpful. We'll go ahead and we're a little bit over now, but we'll go ahead and end it. Thank you all for your time, and thank you to the Attune team.
Yeah, thank you
Take
all
care,
again.
everyone.